Imagine reaching the end of your life, looking back over every single day you've lived, and realizing you wouldn't change a thing. No, I wish I had's. No, if only I knew's. No hollow ache sitting in the center of your chest where unlived dreams were supposed to be. Just peace. Pure, unshakable peace. Now imagine the opposite. Imagine lying in a bed you can barely sit up in, staring at a ceiling, and the only thing running through your mind is a parade of everything you never did, the words you never said, the people you never held, the life you never actually lived because you were too busy surviving. Which ending do you want? Today, we're not just dreaming about that first feeling. We're going to hand you the exact blueprint, drawn from the deepest, hardest-earned insights of those who've lived a full century on this earth, to build that regret-free existence for yourself, starting right now, starting today. Starting with a story about an old man sitting on a wooden bench in a small town that most people have never heard of. His name was Elias. He was 103 years old, and he sat on the same bench every morning at the edge of a park in a coastal town where the wind always carried salt and the sound of waves crashing against rocks that had been there longer than anyone could remember. His hands were weathered, not just wrinkled, but carved, like the hands of someone who had spent a lifetime gripping things that mattered and letting go of things that didn't. His eyes were pale blue, almost silver, and when he looked at you, it felt like he was reading a chapter of your life you hadn't written yet. People in the town knew Elias, not because he was famous, not because he'd done anything the world would put on a magazine cover. They knew him because he was still here, 103 years old, and every morning, without fail, he sat on that bench and watched the world move. A young man named Daniel found him there one Tuesday in October. Daniel was 32 years old, and he was falling apart in the way that people in their 30s sometimes fall apart, quietly, invisibly, in a suit and tie. From the outside, he looked fine. Good job, decent apartment, a car that started every morning. But inside, something was rotting. He couldn't name it. He just knew that every night when he lay down, he felt further from himself than he'd been the night before. He'd driven to this coastal town on impulse, calling in sick to work for the first time in 6 years, because he'd woken up that morning and realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd done something that actually mattered to him. He saw the old man on the bench and almost walked past, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the stillness. In a world that never stopped screaming for attention, Elias sat there like a man who had already heard everything worth hearing and was now simply listening to the silence between the noise. "Mind if I sit?" Daniel asked. Elias looked at him. Those silver eyes. "The bench isn't mine," he said, "but the company would be welcome." They sat together for a while without speaking. The waves crashed. A dog ran across the grass, chasing a ball that no one seemed to have thrown. Finally, Daniel, unable to hold it in any longer, said something he hadn't planned to say. "How do you do it?" Elias turned to him. "Do what?" "Live this long and still want to sit here in the morning, still want to see the day." The old man smiled. It was a slow smile, the kind that starts deep in the chest before it ever reaches the lips. "You're asking the wrong question," he said. "The question isn't how I've lived this long. The question is how I've lived at all. And the answer to that one took me a very long time to learn." Daniel leaned forward. "Then teach me." And Elias did. "The first thing you need to understand," Elias began, "is that most people don't actually live. They exist. They wake up, they react to whatever the day throws at them. They go to sleep, and they do it again. Years pass. Decades pass. And then one day, they look up and realize they've been walking, but they never chose a direction. That's where regret comes from. Not from the mistakes you make, but from the absence of intention. From never deciding what your life is actually for." He paused and pointed to a tree at the far end of the park. It was enormous, an old oak with branches that spread wide enough to shade half the lawn. You see that tree? It didn't grow that way by accident. A seed fell in a specific spot. It sent roots down into specific soil. It reached toward a specific patch of sky. Everything about that tree is a response to a direction it chose. Not consciously, the way you and I choose, but by its nature. It knew what it was. And because it knew what it was, it became what it was meant to become. He turned back to Daniel. Most people never figure out what they are. They spend their whole lives growing sideways, trying to be what someone else planted them to be. Their parents, their bosses, their culture. And then they wonder why they feel hollow. Daniel stared at the tree. So how do you figure it out? How do you find your purpose? Elias held up one finger. I'm going to give you 2 questions, just 2. But if you answer them honestly, and I mean honestly, not the answer you think sounds good, not the answer that would impress someone at a dinner party, they will change the trajectory of your life. Daniel nodded. Question 1. What breaks your heart? Not what annoys you. Not what frustrates you. What genuinely breaks your heart when you see it in the world? What suffering? What injustice? What absence makes you ache in a way you can't explain? Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. He thought about it. Really thought about it. And what came to him surprised him. It wasn't anything grand. It wasn't world hunger or climate change. Not because those things didn't matter, but because they weren't his heartbreak. His heartbreak was smaller, closer, more personal. It was loneliness. He thought about his father, who had died alone in a hospital room 3 years ago because none of his children had made it in time. He thought about the old woman in his apartment building, whom he'd seen carrying groceries by herself every Saturday for 2 years and never once offered to help. He thought about himself, sitting in a crowded office surrounded by people, feeling like the only person on earth. Loneliness, he said quietly. People being alone when they don't want to be. Elias nodded slowly, as if Daniel had just handed him something precious. Good. Now, question 2. What are you willing to be bad at for a long time? Not what are you talented at. Not what comes easily. What matters enough to you that you'd be willing to stumble, fail, look foolish, and keep going anyway? This one took longer. Daniel sat with it. He thought about all the things he'd quit because he wasn't immediately good at them. Guitar, painting, writing, coaching, the youth basketball team at the community center. He'd done it for 1 season and stopped because he felt like he wasn't making a difference. Connecting with people, he finally said. I'm terrible at it. I always have been, but I think I'd be willing to be terrible at it for a long time if I thought it could actually matter. Elias smiled again, that deep, chest-first smile. Now put them together, your heartbreak and your willingness. That's your direction. That's your North Star. You don't need to know the exact destination. You just need to know which way to walk. Daniel felt something shift inside him, not a dramatic earthquake. More like a key turning in a lock that had been stuck for years. I wasted so much time, he whispered. No, Elias said firmly. You didn't. I found my direction when I was 67 years old. I spent the first 66 years of my life building someone else's dream. My father's business, my wife's vision of what a husband should be, my community's expectation of a respectable man. And then one morning, I woke up, and my wife had passed in the night, and I was alone in a house full of things that meant nothing to me. And I realized I had never once asked myself what I actually wanted to build. He let that sit in the air. I was 67. I had a heart condition. My knees were already failing. And I decided, for the first time in my life, to find my direction. You're 32. You have time that I would have given anything for. Don't you dare call it wasted. The next morning, Daniel came back. Elias was already on the bench, as if he'd never left. Yesterday you gave me the first piece, Daniel said. Purpose. Direction. What's the second? Elias looked out at the ocean. Connection, he said. And this one is harder, because the purpose you can find alone, in silence, in the privacy of your own mind. But connection requires other people, and other people are terrifying. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. I've read about studies. They come and talk to me, researchers, journalists, people writing books about how to live long. And they all find the same thing. The number one regret of the dying isn't about money. It isn't about career. It isn't about adventures they didn't take. It's about relationships they didn't nurture, words they didn't say, people let drift away because they were too proud, too busy, or too afraid to hold on. He turned to Daniel with an intensity that caught the young man off guard. Who have you lost? And I don't mean to death. I mean to silence. Who is out there right now, alive, breathing, maybe thinking about you? And you've let the distance grow so wide, you've convinced yourself it can't be crossed? Daniel's jaw tightened. He thought of his brother, Michael. They hadn't spoken in 4 years. Not because of any catastrophic betrayal, just a slow accumulation of small wounds, a missed birthday, a careless comment at Thanksgiving, a text that was never returned. And then one day, the silence became the relationship, and neither of them knew how to break it. My brother, Daniel said. Call him. It's not that simple. I didn't say it was simple. I said call him. There is a difference between something being simple. He leaned closer. And beyond your brother, build around yourself a community of people who see you. Not people who need something from you. Not people who perform friendship when it's convenient. People who will sit with you in the dark and not try to turn the lights on. People who will tell you the truth even when it makes you uncomfortable. People who will challenge you to grow and celebrate you when you do. Those people are rare. When you find them, hold on with everything you have. How do you find them? Daniel asked. You don't find them. You become the kind of person they're looking for. You show up. You listen. You give without keeping score. You let yourself be vulnerable, which is the hardest thing a human being can do, because we have been taught since childhood that vulnerability is weakness, when it is in fact the single greatest act of courage available to us. Elias paused and watched a pair of seagulls fight over a scrap of bread. I'll tell you something I've never told anyone. When my wife died, I had hundreds of people at her funeral. Hundreds. And I looked around that room and realized that not a single one of them truly knew me. They knew the man I performed. The reliable Elias. The strong Elias. The Elias who never asked for help and never admitted he was struggling. I had spent decades building walls and calling them strength. He shook his head. It took me years to tear those walls down. Years of showing up at a community center and admitting to strangers that I was lonely. Years of letting people see me cry. Years of learning that asking for help is not a burden to others. It is a gift, because it permits them to be human too. On the third morning, Daniel arrived at the bench to find Elias standing, not sitting. Standing, facing the ocean, his coat flapping in the wind like a flag that had survived 1,000 storms. You're standing, Daniel said stupidly. I'm always standing, Elias replied. I just sometimes do it sitting down, Daniel laughed. It was the first real laugh he'd produced in months. There's a third piece, Elias said, turning to face him. Purpose gives you direction. Connection gives you strength. But the third piece is the one that keeps you alive in the spaces between. Growth. He started walking, slowly, and Daniel fell into step beside him. Most people stop growing the moment they feel comfortable. They find a routine, a rhythm, a rut, because ruts and rhythms feel the same from the inside, and they settle. They tell themselves they've earned the right to stop. They've learned enough. They've suffered enough. They've changed enough. And that is the moment they begin to die. Not physically, spiritually. The soul needs challenge the way the lungs need air. He stopped at the edge of the water where the waves licked the rocks. When I was 71, I learned to swim. 71 years old, in a public pool, surrounded by children, being taught by a 19-year-old lifeguard named Sarah, who had to hold me up because I was terrified of the water. The most humiliating 3 months of my life, and the most important. Why? Daniel asked. Because it taught me that I was still capable of becoming someone new. That the person I was yesterday did not have to be the person I am tomorrow. That growth isn't something that belongs only to the young. It belongs to anyone brave enough to say, I don't know how to do this yet, and mean the word yet. He picked up a smooth stone from the ground and turned it over in his hand. Every year, I choose one thing that scares me, and I do it. When I was 75, I traveled to a country where I didn't speak the language, alone. When I was 80, I wrote a letter to every person I had ever wronged and mailed it without knowing if I'd ever hear back. When I was 88, I stood on a stage at the community center and read a poem I had written about my wife in front of 200 people, with tears running down my face. Each time I was terrified, each time I grew, and each time the territory of my life expanded just a little more. He handed the stone to Daniel. Growth isn't about achievement. It's not about trophies or milestones or proving something to the world. It's about remaining in conversation with life. It's about refusing to let your story end before your heart stops beating. The moment you say, this is who I am, and I will never change, you have written your own eulogy while you're still breathing. Daniel turned the stone over in his hand, feeling its weight. I'm afraid, he admitted. I'm afraid that I've already waited too long, that the patterns are set, that I'm too far into this version of myself to become someone different. Elias put his hand on Daniel's shoulder. The grip was surprisingly strong. Let me tell you something about time. Everyone thinks it's a river, flowing in one direction, carrying you forward, whether you want to go or not. But it's not a river, it's a field, an open field, and you can walk in any direction you choose at any moment you choose. The only thing that keeps you on the path you're on is the belief that you have to stay on it. He squeezed Daniel's shoulder. You don't. You never did. Daniel left that town on a Thursday afternoon. He sat in his car for 20 minutes before driving away, staring at the park, at the bench, at the ocean beyond it. Then he picked up his phone and called his brother. Michael answered on the third ring. There was a long silence. And then Daniel said, I miss you, and I'm sorry we let this happen. The silence stretched. And then Michael's voice, cracked and raw, said, I've been waiting for that call for 4 years. They talked for 2 hours. They didn't fix everything, but they started. On the drive home, Daniel pulled over at a rest stop and wrote 2 things on the back of a gas receipt. His heartbreak, loneliness, his willingness, connecting with people, even badly. He folded the receipt and put it in his wallet where it would stay for years, softening at the creases, the ink fading, but never disappearing. The following week, he volunteered at a community center. He was terrible at it, awkward, uncertain. He said the wrong things. He didn't know how to comfort a 70-year-old widow who just wanted someone to sit with her while she ate lunch. So he just sat there, silently, and she reached over and held his hand, and they stayed that way for 30 minutes, and it was the most meaningful thing he had done in years. He signed up for a pottery class. He was the worst in the room. His bowls collapsed. His mugs leaked. The instructor, a patient woman in her 50s, told him, the clay doesn't care about your pride. It only responds to your hands. He kept going. He wrote letters to old friends, to his mother, to a college roommate he hadn't thought of in a decade. Some people wrote back. Some didn't. It didn't matter. The act of reaching out was the point. The act of saying, you mattered to me, and I should have told you sooner. 2 years later, Daniel drove back to the coastal town. He walked to the park. The bench was empty. He sat down and waited. Elias didn't come. He asked at the small cafe nearby. The woman behind the counter, she must have been in her 60s, smiled sadly. Elias passed in the spring, she said, quietly. In his sleep, he was 105. Daniel nodded. He couldn't speak for a moment. Did he have any regrets? He finally asked, not sure why he was asking a stranger this question, but needing to know. The woman thought about it. I asked him that once, she said, a few months before he died. He laughed and said, I have 1,000 regrets, but none of them kept me up at night, because every one of them taught me something, and I used every lesson. Then he said something I'll never forget. What? He said, the only regret that can destroy you is the regret of never having tried. Everything else is just tuition. Daniel sat on that bench for a long time after. The waves crashed against the rocks. A dog ran across the grass. The wind carried salt and the sound of a world that kept going, endlessly, beautifully, indifferently. He thought about purpose and how it doesn't arrive in a lightning bolt, but in a quiet knowing that builds over time when you ask yourself the right questions and dare to answer honestly. He thought about connection and how every relationship is a living thing that needs attention and vulnerability and the willingness to bend, even when you think you're right, especially when you think you're right. He thought about growth and how the most courageous thing a person can do is walk into a room where they are the least capable person and say, teach me. And he thought about Elias, a man who found his direction at 67, who learned to swim at 71. He read a poem about his dead wife to 200 strangers at 88, who sat on a bench every morning at 103, not because he was waiting for death, but because he was still in love with life. The blueprint isn't complicated. It never was. Purpose, connection, growth, 3 pillars. That's all. But building them requires something that no one can give you and no one can take away. The decision to start. Not tomorrow. Not when the timing is right. Not when you've figured everything out. Now. Today. This moment. With whatever you have. Wherever you are. However afraid you might be. Because the clock is ticking. It always has been. And the only question that will matter at the end is not how long you lived, but whether you were actually alive while you were living. Elias was. Are you?